All right. So, Natalie, great. Wasn't that a great presentation? Yeah, you know, when it comes down to a world that you can't trust mainstream media, you actually can't trust central bankers either. When it, you have to understand that nobody has all the answers, right? So, one of the biggest themes in macroeconomics right now is, you know, how the Federal Reserve had us believe that inflation was transitory. They're going to redefine transitory, much like they're going to redefine a definition of a Fed pivot, much like they're probably going to have to change their inflation target. All of these things are part of a narrative that you need to be questioning the people who deliver the information, right? Perhaps the most disconcerting thing I've seen in the last, I'm going to say 2 years, is that Ben Bernanke was awarded the Nobel Prize. I mean, that is an absolute embarrassment. That being said, we are living in a system right now that is the consequence of the actions of the central bank in the 1980s. Okay, so you guys remember that Paul Volcker in the 1980s was fighting inflation, which incidentally was the similar level to the current level inflation, CPI inflation we have now of 8%. Where did he have interest rates? He had interest rates at double digits. Okay? Then came Alan Greenspan. Then came helicopter Ben Bernanke, who gets the Nobel Prize for solving a financial situation that his two predecessors caused, and he was the one that assured us subprime mortgage crisis is well contained. So I'm just trying to set up a situation in the you know, learn from our past to bring us to the present situation. We are dealing, in my opinion, with a situation that scares me as much today as when I was managing risk in 2008 and 2009. Okay? Don't underestimate the true level of risk that we have in the global financial system right now. Now, the positive is, when was Bitcoin designed? 2009, in response to the global financial crisis. Thank goodness we have a tool now that we can use to hedge the failed policies of the central banks in the past. So I'll just open, you know, I'll throw it out. Please build off of what Natalie said. Don't believe everything you read in the mainstream media. Question the ethics and perhaps even the intelligence, well, certainly question the intelligence of the global central bankers. This is the most risky time in the markets since 2009, and the problem is cycles are shorter and the negative responses are greater because we've just kicked the can down the road. So on that note, I'll just pass it over to our panel. Risk happens fast, and today risk happens faster. Why? Because of all the things we've done wrong in the past.
There's just no place for the debt to go anymore. So what ends up happening when we talk about what Volcker was dealing with in the U.S. At that time, the U.S. was still the reference rate currency of the world, but the U.S. had 30% debt to GDP, and so by causing a collapse of the economy in the U.S., they could transfer because when you cause that collapse, all of the people still need services and everything else, and they don't have jobs, and they go to the government and they try to get jobs. So the market collapsed, but all they did is moved the debt up to the government level, where it grew and grew and grew and grew. And so now you have the country with the reference rate currency of the world, the U.S. It's trading with all other nations. All other nations are tied to that. That has 130% debt to GDP, and so you're in a debt trap. And so you cannot get out of that debt trap without much higher inflation or without deflation. And with the deflation, what ends up happening is the credit collapses, but the credit is the entire system. So it's not the deflation I talk about, the good deflation. It's a credit, it's debt deflation, and every single thing collapses. Every bank collapses, everything continues to collapse if you allow that deflation to continue. But it's the reference rate currency of the world, which everybody else transacts on, and other currencies are pegged to, that has to inflate 10% a year on an ongoing basis to try to get the debt under control. That's unfortunately, that's the facts. Now, how it gets there, tighten, loosen, but it needs to debase the currency. And that currency, being the reference rate of every other currency, that means the pain to every other currency and pain that's coming to every other nation relying on that trade is extraordinarily difficult. And then those currencies have their debt priced in the US dollar. So as the US dollar gets stronger, they have to sell everything to try to get enough dollars to be able to pay back a debt that's unpayable. So our macro setup, when Greg talks about it scares him worse than 2000 or the same as 2008, it is much worse than 2008. In 2008, there was a way to pretend to kick the can down the road and solve this. Now, it didn't come without cost. The cost was transfer of wealth from the middle class and poor to the rich. Big monopoly companies getting stronger and co-opting lobbying process and everything else. And the same people that created the financial crisis in the first place get rich by solving it. And the same people get Nobel Prizes for solving the problem that they created in the first place, which is just ludicrous. And because of status quo bias and recency bias and deferring to experts, when things are bad, we go back to the same experts that are creating the problem and make it worse. Can you solve it for us? And so it's worse. And we're now near the end of the kicking of the can down the road. Now what that means is you have to expect the unexpected. It's going to be really volatile. Things are going to, I can't tell you exactly when the wheels come off in every country. I can just tell you the wheels are going to come off in every country. And it's going to be, and when Natalie talks about that don't trust the media and everything else or not, it's just in that type of chaos, you can expect that a lot of people don't know this. They don't know that the plumbing of the financial system is completely broken. And they're trying to, and they can't fix it by more glue and duct tape, and it's coming apart. That's where we are in the world, and Bitcoin is that transition path outside of that system that we hope moves faster to protect people from the worst of the system coming apart.
I'd like to add my point of view. When this system obviously came to a halt or to an end, to me, it was like 2008 when the Americans saved their asses, printing a ton of money to the post-GFC. And that's when players like Russia, China was like, hold on. This is not the set of rules we agreed on. We know we print you 2% new money, we distribute it this way and that way, and we all kind of cheat on our own people. But these are like global set of rules, the so-called targeted inflation. So when the Americans print money, they pretty much force everybody to do the same, because their currency will become, in comparison, more expensive, their exports will go down, employment will go up. So since we don't have a gold standard, when Americans print, everybody else has to jump. But to me, it's like the big other players at that moment decided that they don't want to participate in this same game. Like when the Western world prints money and it gives financial promises in exchange for energy, real products from China or raw materials from Africa, it's a good game if you're a Westerner, but really bad game if you are coming from the East and the South. So to me, it looks like Russia and China are forcing the change of rules. And Russia pretty much sold all their treasuries in 2012 or 13, which means that they already didn't believe in this financial promise in exchange for energy. And probably since then, the so-called deep state has been working hard how to decouple Russia from Europe, which combined together are pretty mighty force. One produces energy cheaply, the other one produces craftsmanship as end products, which are sold 20 times more than the energy input. So if the dollar, and right now during COVID, I mean, just 2 years ago, they printed what?
$9 trillion.
A few trillion more.
Well, yeah, to put that in context, in the great financial crisis, 900 billion was printed for TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Program.
Started at 300.
For COVID, 9 trillion. Okay.
So this is the end game. I mean, it looks, by all accounts, it's like the end game. And it's a game scenario, I imagine. Let's say the Americans know that the game is rigged in their interest, but all the big players already caught them off guard, let's say. So if you can print money faster than the others, you have the benefit to buy as much resources as possible before the game is before things are over. So imagine the Americans, when they print, they literally gave money to bank accounts in personal bank accounts. That was the first time, right? We didn't get that here in Bulgaria or in Asia. I mean, even during COVID, generally the government did not give away money. But when you have the world reserve currency, you have the privilege to literally give away money to people, and you give them a signal: spend as fast as you can. Because things are not going to be the same in the next 10 to 15 years. There will be a new system in place. Probably after some chaos, some hot wars here and there. Historically, usually wars help a lot to change the system, to reset the game. From all game scenarios, for me, nobody trusts anybody now. I mean, among the big players, Bitcoin looks like the silent little player, which can play a big part when big players don't trust each other to exchange, trade. They will have no choice. They will have to trade one way or another. We don't live on separate universe, you know. Yeah, and trade is what unites us.
I think that is important, but it's important. If you have the reserve currency of the world, what that requires from the Triffin dilemma, somebody has to buy, somebody has to sell. And what that means is, in one country, you have to have high living standards. You have to spend a lot. It has to be financed by debt. And so in the other country, it has to be financed by you essentially giving vendor financing loans for cheap labor to be able to. And the world trade balance has to equal zero. So that is the map all over the world. It has to look the same. Same thing in the euro. When the euro experiment starts, the euro says, okay, Germany, everybody in Greece gets a raise, and here you go, and you buy a whole bunch more products from Germany, and we lend you the money to do so. Oh, you can't pay them back? Oh, our banks are going to fail. Right? That's actually what's happening all over the world. In other words, what that says is you need a neutral reserve currency that can flow all over the world instead of one country to having control the currency. Now, think about it from a U.S. perspective, even if instead of it's been manipulated against everybody else. What it means for a U.S. perspective is there's no way to create economic growth in manufacturing in the U.S., including of critical components for supply chain for the geopolitical or war machine, including. Those have to be outsourced to cheaper countries, cheaper labor. And so you outsource all of what your future as you create this. And so it creates a geopolitical mess all over the world as this is racing back and forth. And that mess is what you're in today. And over top of that mess is you're going to hear different things from different states and trying to say it's those people's fault over there. And you'll likely believe it. But it's just a structural problem of the global financial system that we are in that is nearing end of days. And when it nears end of days, it causes this relation back and forth. Now you have to be very, very careful. And I say that very, very careful because when you're in these end of days, you can expect volatility too. If you were all in cash, and then the next day, they change that reference rate and cash gets destroyed by 40%, you're effectively wiped out. Or if your pension, like the UK, like Greg was talking about, is in that, and you've worked all your life to be able to retire, and it's gone, you might be mad, right? You might go and try to look for what's the problem, but that is a likely event in a whole bunch of things. And then on the other side of it, if you've taken a whole bunch of loans against Bitcoin, and then Bitcoin goes down for a while, and you lose your job, and you can't pay the loans, your margin called on Bitcoin. So in this type of event, and now if Bitcoin goes up, and then you can make a whole bunch of extra money by taking that loan. But in this type of environment, with all the risk coming, I would be careful on margin. I would be careful on leverage.
Yeah, I have a little bit of a more radical opinion about the macroeconomic situation. And again, in my opinion, we're currently, each and every one of us, being part of a economic and psychological warfare that's being waged on us by the central banks. And let me elaborate why. So, first of all, at the moment now, keeping your money at the bank, it's not profitable at all. First of all, inflation, it's worse than any amount of money that the bank gives you as a deposit. First of all, we know that even last year, the percentage that the bank gave on a deposit was negative. Now they're, floating around 1%. So pretty much the inflation is eating your money, but this is done on purpose. The banks don't want your money in the bank. They want you to actually spend it so you can actually stimulate the economy. This is the economical warfare, for you to make it uncomfortable, for you not to actually have and save money. That's why I always have those commercial, get the gifts to your loved one, go to the Maldives, get that car, get that leasing, buy that jet ski, whatever. It's all bullshit. It's all an illusion. This is the economic warfare. The psychological one, it's pretty rough. It's what actually, literally, makes us into the biggest slavery nation ever. Let me elaborate why. Because currently, let me give you an example. Currently, you're working 8 hours a day, and you get paid an X amount of money. So 1 year ago, for that same amount of time that you input, you get an X amount of money, and you could afford an X amount of things. Currently, for the same amount of time that you're working, you cannot afford even the same things for previous years. And that means that now you have to do two things. You either have to work multiple jobs, or you have to use, let's say, no offense, Robin Hood, without any knowledge, invest into stocks, bonds, things that you don't understand, just to make ends meet. And this is actually economic slavery, because now the banks are literally stealing from your time. You're working more and more, and you can afford less and less. And that's actually stealing from your life, literally.
I agree. So I guess one of the things I need to bring to the table is a perspective of risk management that I've learned over the 35 years is when information changes, change your outlook. Don't stick to a dated investment policy guideline, 60-40. It worked until it didn't. We talked about that on the previous panel. There's an old adage, don't fight the Fed. I'm sure you guys have heard that. Now, there are some practitioners in the market that actually believe the Fed is moving down a path where they don't care what happens in the rest of the world. If you call it economic warfare, that is absolutely a potential. I'm probably in the camp where I believe that the Fed is more of a clown car than it is a evil organization, okay? But I could be wrong. So remember, this is an opinion that's not 100% certain. It's actually my opinion that Jerome Powell wants to be Paul Volcker, but he can't possibly be, because when Volcker had interest rates at 12%, because inflation was at 8%, he had 30% total debt to GDP. And today, Jerome Powell has total debt to GDP in the USA of 125. I think Jeff said 130%. It's mathematically impossible to bring interest rates to the same level to fight inflation. So it's my opinion that you either have a deflationary bust, like Jeff was saying, or you have global depression. You know, we're using the word recession. We're pussyfooting around. Come on. It's going to be a global depression, people. What's the good news? All paths lead to Bitcoin. This is the perfect outcome. I don't know which scenario plays out, but Bitcoin's the solution in both scenarios. Like, this is how you manage risk. I can't be wrong. Like, do you know the word fuck? Like, this is the best fucking position we can be in right now because we can't be wrong. We don't have to rely on either a clown car Fed or an evil Dr. Evil Fed, right? Both paths lead to Bitcoin. My risk management job is done. So you should be actually happy, although my preference would be I don't want suffering. I actually don't want the world to go into a global depression. I don't think Jeff wants it. And by and large, I would say nobody here wants to punish the children of the world. It's not the USA that's going to feel all the pressure. It's going to be the First Nation, the peripheral nations, right? Like it always is. So when I first started trading in 1988, it was the Latin American debt crisis. And Mexico and Brazil, Argentina were all bankrupt. Do you know that during my career, Argentina has gone bankrupt 4 times? Another way of saying that is if they issued a 30-year bond in 1988, it's never matured. Not once, it's never matured. Not twice, it's 4 times. And yet the clown world still lends them money. Think about how broken this system is, how eventually it will collapse one way or the other, and then how all paths lead to Bitcoin. You know, we could get real granular about whether they should pivot if the Fed funds overnight rate, which is currently at 3.25% and it's supposed to go to 4%, whether it's going to get there. Again, we're getting too fancy, in my opinion, especially for a group of people like yourselves who don't have control over it. You only have control over what you can do in the eventuality of either outcome. And again, I'm very happy to say it's my opinion that both paths or all paths lead to Bitcoin. My preferred path, though, is a transition, orderly transition, where you move away from global reserve currency being the US dollar. What is that? I believe it's when oil and natural gas becomes priced in Bitcoin globally. Now, there are some people who don't view Bitcoin as being digital energy like I do, but nonetheless, that would be an orderly transition that allows the US dollar to maintain reserve currency status, but Bitcoin would replace US treasuries as global reserve asset, okay? And that's sort of an outcome that I'm rooting for because, again, it's less damaging to the people that matter most to us, which are our children and people in less privileged countries that right now are getting destroyed by the US dollar wrecking ball. So I have one last, it's sort of funny, but all fiats are melting ice cubes, right? It's just that their relative rate of decay is measured against a US dollar, which is also debasing, but it's actually just debasing at a slower rate than secondary and tertiary fiats. But here's the expression. Perhaps you've heard me say it. There's 2, actually. First, the US dollar is the best-looking horse at the glue factory. Doesn't make it good, but it's still... And the second one is, it's like the US dollar is the best crack house on a crack street. They're all drug addicts. It's just that the US dollar looks best. So don't overthink things. It's only mathematics. All paths lead to Bitcoin. They start in the credit markets where I've spent my whole career, and that's why I think Bitcoin and macroeconomic concerns will reverberate out of the credit portfolios and the credit systems and move to Bitcoin. That's my hope.
And just building on that, that's what I wrote about in the book. I wrote about in the book, essentially the free market and technology. Technology is just a word describing what we do to come up with better ways to do it, right? That's all, and it describes our innovation to make our lives better. And that, what you understand is that has to be deflationary, has to drive prices down. And when I looked at the other side of the ledger, what we're talking about, is you realize is the debt has to grow to be able to stop that from happening, and it has to keep growing exponentially. And one of the points I made in the book, and you wouldn't see it inside a country, because inside countries, they're just kicking the can down the road further and further and further, and it's rolling up. And it starts at individuals, and then it moves to banks, and then the banks don't want to fail, so the government takes over the bank. And so it just moves up the stack. And we're now at the government debt stack that has grown. When I wrote the book, the debt was, in the last 20 years, to offset what was happening in technology. And remember, this is to offset you not working as hard, you getting stuff cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. That's what it's to offset. It's that productivity reaching society. To offset that and transfer that productivity to a very few number of people, this is the debt stack what we're talking about. And you created $185 trillion of global debt for $46 trillion of economic growth. Almost 4-to-1 debt to GDP growth. Now that's not, the GDP growth is one thing, that's not the earnings you make on the GDP growth. It's the, if you tax it at 100%, you couldn't fix it. And you knew that technology is moving faster and faster. And the only way that a free market company could actually make more money to get us to use it is to actually remove labor faster with technology. And every time they did it, you had to create more prices going up to be able to stop that from happening. And so you could see totally perfectly well that you were going to end, you're going on two different paths that are opposing paths. And you're driving society to the brink through that path. And what happened? Obviously what happened, and it happened, what people don't realize is well before COVID, the market started cracking. In September of the year before we saw COVID, the market started cracking, started breaking down. And what's the
reverse repo?
Reverse repo started breaking. So they started trying to fix that in the reverse repo market, which has consequences around the globe. And then COVID, and okay, and now we're going to jump in. But here's the point: it's an exponential path, and it has to be exponential. So that growth in debt has to be exponential to a point that there's no possible way, as Greg says, to pay back that growth or pay back that debt in nominal terms. You have to destroy currency values to be able to pay it back. And now, globally, everybody's looking. There's this in chaos theory. There was this experiment in 1987. There are 3 physicists that did this great experiment, and they did. It's called the sandcastle game. And what they did for you drop a piece of sand on a table over and over and over again. And what the sand would do is it would reach a critical state, and then it would collapse, avalanche. Then keep going, reach another critical state in a different place, avalanche. And then they created a computer program to be able to do that faster. What they found is you could never predict the critical state that caused the avalanche. You could never predict the next grain of sand. Sometimes 10, sometimes 1 million, sometimes 100,000. You could never predict it. Really critical. So you have everyone believing they can predict it. Every event that people are saying, oh, Japan's going to fall off the rails, 2008, now it's going to fail, and every single person predicts that they can solve it when it's mathematically impossible to predict it. And worse, what they did is in that experiment, they color-coded, and what it describes is nonlinear systems. So chaos theory describes nonlinear systems, and our economy and our interactions with each other is a nonlinear system. So then they color-coded the green and the red as it reached critical state, and green as it wasn't. And what they realized is underneath this, every time you had an avalanche, every time you had over and over and over, it built more and more critical state, and they're called fingers of instability that were red underneath the entire sandcastle. And then all of a sudden, one sand anywhere took the whole sandcastle to the ground. That is chaos theory, and it describes perfectly well a system like the economy that we live in. And what it means is when you're listening to Ben Bernanke or the Fed or anybody in the news and saying this is the thing, or us on the stage saying this is the thing that's going to cause it, it's total bullshit. It's just total bullshit. Look at the trend. Look at the trend. I can't tell you what the thing is that's going to take it down. I just know it's coming down. And so I'm spending my time building and investing in the future I want to see for my kids on a different protocol that brings hope, truth, and a better world.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Well, world reserve currencies don't last forever, historically. And
Neither did the empires.
yeah, so obviously the dollar is at its last leg. What do you do when you're a parasite on the planet? When you consume 1/4 of the energy resources? How do you subdue the animal instincts of people to keep their quality of life much higher at what it should supposed to be in comparison to their export potential? I mean, just to give an example, the GDP of America is 10% in exports. In Europe, it's 50%.
Right.
So who's more kind of useful to the world? But you've got the biggest export for America is dollars itself, right? Digitally mostly. I lost my train of thought.
Their biggest export is inflation.
Yeah, inflation.
Yeah,
And the developed world has become masters of disguising inflation, especially since the 60s and the 70s when they broke the gold standard, where they do print 10% new money, but most of this inflation doesn't stay inside their borders. They export it through globalization. That's been the norm last 40 years. Globalization, bring cheaper labor, cheaper products. And it's the developing territories that have to be hit with inflation. So the developed world had the privilege to print money, to create make-believe work, literally social influencers, whatever shit they can come up with, whereas the developing world has to do the real work, the real proof of work. And now with the deglobalization, quite forcibly started this year, obviously. It started years ago, but with Russia and Europe, that's pretty obvious point of no return for many years to come. The Western world doesn't have the privilege anymore to print and export. They will have to pay the price for all their misdeeds last 40 years, all this printed
so I'd be careful.
artificial currency.
I'd just be careful with that. And that's why, because you could say that if they tighten, so let's play that game theory. Let's say they keep tightening.
But you cannot buy energy anymore for free or cheaply.
But here's the thing. U.S. is energy independent. So,
okay.
And they're food independent. So if they keep tightening and the rest of the world falls off the rails, and then they say, oh, now we're going to help you out.
They sacrifice Europe as before.
Yeah, and they sacrifice
like
Europe.
The Second World War.
And they sacrifice Japan, and they sacrifice, but they still do have that, but they might decide to do that to decide to risk, the risk with China is too great, or the risk with Russia is too great. And there is nothing right now that China or Russia could do about that choice. So I just want to
new economic alignments.
Yeah, but the new economic alignment, somebody would have to be the buyer, somebody would have to be the seller, and you have and you have countries that now that might happen, but in all of the different eventualities here, I think you just have to be careful about reserve currencies like that with global trade platforms on a network effect don't end immediately. They end with a whimper over time.
Or with
Exactly,
with elevated inflation
Yeah.
for a long time to come.
Yeah.
Whereas
Guys,
the East doesn't have to pay the price through high inflation. So this will change a lot of things. I mean, Westerners will become very anxious why everything is going up, going up, going up. Whereas I see the rest of the world doesn't have to do the same. You know, inflation will force a lot of normies to open up their eyes that there's another path with deflationary currency.
Yeah, and maybe, but again, when people live, what I worry about the most is when people live in fear, they turn towards the fear. They don't see opening. They don't typically, like, although, and I try to talk about this in not bad actors, but a system just doing what it's going to do to protect a system. Now, and I know that makes me maybe potentially different in the Bitcoin community too, because once you understand Bitcoin, you assume they're bad actors. But that system is just a system reinforcement, and most of the people in the system have no idea even how the system works. It just reinforces on itself. And you'd have to argue, if you just looked back from where the planet's gone over the last, forget the last 10 years, go back before that, we lifted the world out of poverty, a lot of the world out of the poverty in China and everything else. So if you argued that was a bad thing for society.
Thanks to globalization, until the game was in the benefit of the West.
Totally, but it was always in the benefit of the West. That's the thing. The West had to open up China to be able to keep the game going, and that benefited the world to be able to do it, and now it's no longer benefiting the U.S. anymore, so the rules are changing. And so these things, when things change, realize they've changed.
talking about change,
Just a few, let me give you an example. Just a few days ago, the American government made new regulation, which is making it illegal to work in the semiconductor industry in China.
Yes.
So literally, they're already fighting China on many fronts.
For sure.
They know it's over. They cannot build new trust into a new system unless there's a real big mayhem and war and whatever. So something new will come up. It's not the dollar, it's not the euro. It's
do you know actually what is the
like
new, what is actually, because, you know, listening to you guys, and it's something that I've been thinking for quite a while, that, you know, we've been talking about how we can fight the system, how we can open the eyes, the minds, and the hearts of the people. And guys, to be honest, you know, talking about change, talking about evolution, we don't actually have to impose it that much, and it's for a superiorly very simple reason. The change comes from those who govern, and those who govern are not going to be, as you said, the elderly gentleman at the age of 65, 70. Guys, it's going to be our turn, literally. We, the new generation, and the guys who are going to be on the positions of the people that we are trying to fight, we are trying to oppose. There are already people in the Security Exchange Commission, in the government. You know what? You know, some of them are younger guys, some of them are older. But currently, you cannot stop the new wave of thinking. And as soon as the people who are opposing the system that we are trying to integrate at the moment, you know, let go of the world.
That's a passing by period. We don't want their permission anyway.
The thing is that you don't have to, because we are going to be in that position. Because as soon as we do things like this, gather around as a community, talk about it, and you guys tell your friends and make them interested, and not just about the volatility and how we can all buy Lambos at some point. Fuck that shit. It's much greater. It's about generation. It's about an wealth of equality, something we don't have right now, because the system is not fair. And as soon as we, as a community, get in the positions where we make the decisions, and that will be a certainty, then the system will change itself.
Yeah, I mean, I can give an example by myself. When I started doing business when I was 17, let's call it business, you know, building websites, I had no idea what I'm doing. I just knew that I liked the idea of building websites. Knowing what I know now, I'll be scared to start a business because I had to go through a lot of, you know, bullshit later on. But I tried to stay away from the legitimate building of business until I had some cash flow. I was like, I don't want to touch this laws and accountants and lawyers and all this, bullshit. I was using a friend to bring the revenue through him. He pays to me, totally in the dark. And I liked it because it was so free. I built something out of nothing, just with my brain skill set, reading a page, reading some book about HTML. So this was such a true freedom for me, because I come from nothing, and I was able to participate in the global marketplace, because there were no barriers to entry. It was a green, big field on the internet. 1999, we're talking, 1997. It's the same with Bitcoin. It's this huge new field where if you have, for now, more of a digital skill set, you have access to way more opportunities globally to participate with other players without having to go through artificial intermediaries, which make starting a business or competing expensive unnecessarily, just to protect some vested interest. So naturally, these people that are growing up now, they're in their teens and start to trying to figure out how to make their life better, naturally should tend to come to the Bitcoin world, where the world is your stage, and there are no barriers. There's no ID verification, no shit like that. I mean, you just do something useful, and people can recognize you with their satoshis.
Although that's the first time, because we're friends with you since a long time, I would disagree with you, to be honest. And coming from the, even if you think about it right now, the MiCA regulation will, although it's really brutal, because this commission, for those who don't know, are now coming up with a regulation that will pretty much, which is kind of cool at the same time. It will give one regulation for the entire European Union. And of course, the bullshit part of it is that every decision is being made on closed doors. Being from the crypto corporate sector, we do know a few things because they actually need to inform us so we can actually adapt. And the one thing is that by the end of 2023, all of the transactions that you guys are now doing, if they are above 1,000 USDT, they will be not just similar, they will be equal to the online banking sending. So that means you will actually have to send what is the reason of you sending that amount, to whom you are sending it. And of course, I know now right now what you're feeling. You're feeling disgust, like all the taking, especially for you.
That's for custody tokens.
No,
you can't do shit anything if it's a private wallet.
Yeah.
And again, game theory. When the government is trying to impose its bullshit.
But you need to cash out at some point, Srebrin.
So no, you guys. Here's the thing. It's not. If you think technology is going to be stopped by that, you're missing the
No, that's what I was going
to.
I was going to finish my thought that this is actually a good thing, because although for some, and especially the guys that we've been in crypto since a longer time, we're used to the frivolities that the crypto sector offers, but actually this is going to open the doors with a kick that was never entered before. So actually the institutional players and even everybody who was squeamish or conservative about our sector can now enter more freely. And we love that, because that means not just more, cash flow, which will pump the price, which is of course good. We're not, just for the technology. Let's be honest. At least me.
But that's an intermediate. That's an intermediary process where we need to exchange shit tokens like euro, dollar for satoshis. Long term, your business is out of business because we don't really need that exchange. Imagine a world where we measure things in satoshis.
And that's the
I would love to.
And that's the thing. Where this is going. I run a venture capital firm
More like
in
15.
Bitcoin only. It's called Ego Death Capital. If you're building on the Bitcoin ecosystem, Lightning, other companies then give me a call. We'll look at it as investment. We're making investments in this, and what I will tell you is nobody understands. If you're not in there and understanding what's coming, then you just said that. There is no way to stop this technology that empowers the world from stopping. It's going to accelerate. It's going to remove the ability for transactions to be tracked everywhere. And the governments they're trying to play catch up, and this is moving faster. It's going to be impossible to stop this. In a certain country, if they try to stop it, effectively what they do, because it's an open protocol network,
Exodus to new place, yeah.
Then all that happens is they shut that country off and those citizens off from effectively the internet. So it's like North Korea saying, we're going to ban the internet. How did that go, right? And it went really well for the power of North Korea, but really terrible for the citizens. And so because this is an open protocol and we are globally trading individuals, then that race creates somebody shuts it off, it creates an advantage for another country to go faster, and people will just move to the new country. And what that new country needs to do, it will attract the talent. Remember, all of these countries are attracting capital. They're trying to attract the best jobs, the best people, and everything else. And now you have something that's outside of the control of any government. You can't financially repress it. You can't take it from me. I can store it in my head, and I can get on a plane and I can go to another country. Try to stop that.
Yeah, I truly believe that Bitcoin allows you to be individual sovereign.
Yeah.
With all my assets, I can vote with my feet. Big people can become way more, what's that called?
Independent.
Independent, I mean, move around where there's better opportunity, and there's no barrier that can stop you. Because usually governments hope to give you a hard time when you try to leave with your assets. You're like, I really have to give away so much. Do I have to do that?
And you stay there because all of your wealth is in that country. Your houses are in that country.
It's sanctioned by the state somehow.
Your houses are in your tax. You can't get out of the country unless you leave as an immigrant, as a refugee.
Things change a lot with Bitcoin. I mean,
so here's a cool statistic. You know, bringing it back to a macroeconomics discussion a little bit higher level. Fiat currency is good for something. It's good for avoiding the necessity for barter, right? Like you have a product in one country and you need to trade tea in China for, I don't know, USA product, wheat, okay? You don't trade, you have a currency and it makes the necessity for barter, takes that away. But here's a stat that probably a lot of people don't realize. Total global economic trade versus total global economic foreign exchange transactions.
Trillions in days.
Trading is 7 times the size of global trade. So foreign exchange transactions, speculation, is 7 times as large as global trade. Doesn't that indicate a level of financial excess that there's too much speculation in a system called the fiat Ponzi? So bringing it back to that level is Bitcoin is a solution that is not just a store of value, it's a payment rail. Okay, and I think this is what Jeff is saying, building a technology on top of a payment rail. Layer 1,
Do you want to go question?
base layer versus layer 2 and layer 3. So do you guys want to do questions or whatever? But remember that the fiat system itself promotes excess by allowing speculation in the fiat currency that was designed to facilitate international trade. You have banks in there trading 7 times the total amount of global trade because they're speculating on the DXY. The global wrecking ball is going to continue. Let's get in on the game and crush all the other countries. But it doesn't matter. We're making money doing it. It's going to end, people. Sometimes it's going to end more violently than we want and potentially faster as well.
So that's
Be careful.
I actually just want to build on exactly what you said. Because when we talked about before a system that's 4 orders of magnitude bigger, and what each of us do in that system is try to make enough money to escape the system. Isn't that ironic, right? How can we make enough money to get out of that system? And the irony is we make it stronger as we do it. And we make ourselves weaker as we race into the system. And also, that system, because it's based on manipulation and effectively coercion and control, the only way to stay solvent is to remove your individual rights and freedoms and control you more. It's the only way. Capitalism and communism are the exact same system under manipulated money. It's not a free market. It's all resides on a free, and so it has to, as you get deeper and deeper into this, it has to remove your individual rights and freedoms, and that misinformation or coercion is really a control function of the existing system. And why people don't rise up into it is they don't think it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And when you run into dictatorships, why don't you ask, why doesn't everybody stand up on the streets? Because the data shows if 3% of people stood up, dictator falls. 3%. Why don't 3% stand up? Because it's so risky to stand up against that oppressive nature that the first people shot, or imprisoned, cut off from the financial system, and it happens over and over and over again. So that fear keeps the silent majority stuck in a system they know is corrupt, but they keep on feeding it and making it worse and worse and worse. They know it's corrupt, but they think maybe I can escape it before that happens, or I'm silent, or I don't want to stand up together. And that's in the world we live in today, 3%, and those are the numbers we see all over the world. Why don't people stand up? And they don't stand up because of the same thing. And now you have this thing called Bitcoin. It is the most peaceful process, and all you have to do is go buy it, and nobody knows. And and as you do it, you're creating a world where those 3% right now we're maybe 1%, and as it turns into 3%, 4%, and the economy that's generated out of that, because now we have 170 million people on Bitcoin and they're all trading with each other and it's driving values. As it turns into that, the system that is based on the coercion falls apart, and this one emerges. And every one of you, that's the most beautiful thing about this. You don't have to yell at the clouds. You don't have to yell. All you have to do is start thinking and doing more time in this. And as you do, nothing can. You don't have to march down the street. It's the most peaceful protest away, and you create the world you want to see.
Or vote in theatrical, public votes for criminal cartels calling themselves parties.
Right.
Why would you do that? I mean, with Bitcoin, it's way easier to find your own tribe globally. Because, okay, the social circle, yes, but Bitcoin itself unites people on so many levels, beyond race, beyond whatever it is. That's what I find beautiful. You know, it's way easier to connect with other Bitcoiners.
Yeah, and in that too, I would say most people in the world looking at technology, looking at Bitcoin, are still measuring Bitcoin at the protocol level. If they're doing that, they're measuring Bitcoin, the asset class that made a whole bunch of money, is going to keep going up. And that's true. That owning Bitcoin is essentially like owning the internet before. We weren't allowed to invest in it. No one invested in the internet. You invested on the companies on top of the internet, Apple, Amazon, Google, that were built on top of the internet. But investing in Bitcoin means that you're owning a piece of all value that ever comes in the future on top of it. It's accruing to you. But on top of Bitcoin, the Lightning Network and Liquid and a whole bunch of Fediment, a whole bunch of stuff that's coming that nobody sees yet, is going to radically change our world. And it provides an adoption rate that is so staggering. And I think quite often about this, just because protocols develop and they harden over time. And so the protocol, TCP/IP, came out of DARPA in the 60s, wasn't connected to anything people could really use, or most majority of population, until 1989 HTTP. But even in 1989, if you asked people what it would do, and by the way, it powers everything around your life. It powers your phone, it powers that same stack, that same protocol stack. Even in 1989, people would have totally missed it. Paul Krugman said the internet's going to be no more than a fax machine, no more value to society than an internet. So the experts constantly miss what's happening, especially on protocol layers. So Bitcoin, with the asset, is protocol layer 1, and Lightning, and a bunch, layer 2, layer 3, and what's coming on top of this, when people don't have to think about the plumbing, because it's hard to teach people the plumbing. Right? They don't think about the plumbing of the existing financial system we're talking about macro now. They don't think about the plumbing of the new financial system that's emerging. They think about the products that give them value, what gives them value in their lives. And being able to invest in those companies right now and see what's coming to give you value, that brings on massive adoption, the billions of people, and it's way easier. It's just, it's so unreal to be able to see and play this and work with the entrepreneurs building the future, that I wish you could all see it. I wish you could see that, because you wouldn't be playing in any other shit coins. You wouldn't be gambling with your savings. You would be spending more time trying to understand this, so that and what's coming.
I have two questions. I have two questions. I have two questions that I want to put on the table. First one is going to go for Greg. So the first question is about 6 months ago, when you did the first conference.
Yes.
On my lecture, I talked about how I don't think it's normal that in today's age, where we have these smartphones that have 1 million times or whatever it was, more power than the computer we used to get to the moon, in a world where I can just like call you guys overseas, over the ocean, in Canada, zero whack, and just can talk. In a world where we are striving towards self-driving cars, and we have now actually rockets that lift off and land back. In order to protect my savings, I have to be also a trader. So I have to be a taxi driver, or an accountant, or a lawyer, or an architect, or a software developer, and also like a financial expert or a trader or something, in order to constantly like purchase gold. Now I have to move my capital into silver. Now I have to move it back into stocks. Now I have to go into bonds. Now I have to go somewhere else. And how much effect does the doings of the central banks, the increasing and decreasing of interest rates, and QT and QE for the balance sheet on the central banks, how much that affects the normal people and the markets, including 2008, the global financial crisis, with the bubble of the real estate, and then the whole crash. So how much do these institutions affect us? And would you say that in a scenario where we have Jerome Powell, as I call him, the god of fiat, the god of the dollar, do we have a free market, or do we have a market where actually just like a sheep that are just following our leader?
It's a great question, Plamen. I guess my simple answer is, when you manipulate the cost of money, it leads to bad decisions, including the life support for companies that otherwise should have, gone the way of creative destruction, the basis of capitalism. Jeff mentions this in his book. Creative destructions would not have allowed for zombie companies in the United States. Right now, historical number of zombie companies defined as companies with only 1 times interest coverage to service their debt. Well, it's at historical highs, and it's probably because the Fed kept rates low for so long that they could be kept on life support. Here's what the way I'll answer that is comparing it to the United States of America. If the United States of America was rated as a corporation rather than as a company, it would be rated as a zombie country. Same time, same level of interest coverage, only 1 turn of interest coverage, people. Get this out of your mind. This new paradigm is that countries can fail because all the financial risk has been kicked up to the country level, okay? They were financial crises on top of financial crises that kicked the burden up to the country level, the sovereign debt level. There's nowhere else to kick it. It can't go any further. So manipulation of money has caused this. I would just say the solution is a form of free market, beautiful free market decentralization in the form of Bitcoin, which will bring proper risk calculations into the metrics. It's not that I'm saying I want people to lose their jobs because they work for a zombie company, but creative destruction is an absolute necessity in order to, like a forest, you got to burn the floor of the forest so that massive forest fires don't happen, right? If you keep all the brush on the ground of the forest without letting it clear out, the forest fire that comes is way more severe than would have been if there were minor forest fires all the time. So, and that's, by the way, this is a study they did in California. Down in the Baja Peninsula, where they never clear out, they let little forest fires occur. They don't have the same types of fires they do just north of the border in California, because it's a natural replenishing of the ecosystem. We need a natural replenishing of the ecosystem. In capitalism, it's based on a Bitcoin standard. I hope that let's look back at how humanity has survived, how nature has survived, and build a financial system on that basis. Would be my answer.
Okay.
Because when you get to what he just said, like where we are in the cycle now, then you get theories of somebody who's never sat in a risk chair, somebody who's never built a business, but their theory is a function of them going to school and coming up with ideas that would never work in the free market or to anybody that is actually run a business. And their theory, like modern monetary theory, is essentially says there's no cost for making up money forever. And if we could have solved human abundance by making up units of more money, don't you think society would have figured that out 3,000 years ago or 5,000 years if it was that easy? And so when you see these, like, it's just insane ideas. And yet, because the system is so unstable and it has to get worse, we'll vote for people who will tell us they can give us more free money without realizing they're actually walking into our house and stealing it from our house or our back or other pocket. And we'll vote for those people because of the consequences of not doing it mean the whole system collapses.
There's something else I see about your question. It's about the credit contraction, credit expansion. It's the monetary magic machine, like how they create money. Before, it was few elitist people or close to Wall Street or the financial guys who knew how the machine works. They get telegraphed in advance to everybody else, how they can take advantage of this. Yeah. But now it's the whole fucking retail internet who knows what they're going to do next. Everybody's talking about pivoting. They have to change the system. Too many eyes are on them. One single action and the whole markets can go berserk. This is not normal. Too many people and energy are focused on this, commissariat, I don't know what's in English, at the federal level. The same with the offshore companies. Before, when they created them, the deep state in the 70s, they were designed for, black budgets, for total privacy for the very rich people. Suddenly, because of the internet, very normal people, regular businessmen, can create offshore corporations. So that's why they created these information exchange systems, to destroy the idea of offshore corporations. So they already destroyed the privacy of offshoring. What are they going to do to try to recreate another system to hide their deeds? Because everybody knows how the Fed is playing, how I can try to profit from this. But how can we make all money from nothing if we just try to speculate on their activity? It's total bullshit.
I want to put on the table my second question, which is related to the first one. Because we talked about how debt is being kicked down the road, but also it gets on a level higher. Just yesterday I checked again, and in EU there is at the moment 7 countries with debt to GDP over 100%. There is a few over 150, and our neighbor south of here is at 190, Greece.
It's bankrupt long time.
They already defaulted like 2013 or something. My question is like because we talked earlier about, again, getting into Bitcoin standard could be a completely different road from what we hope or what we expect and so on. And you said it doesn't matter if it's going to be a deflationary burst or that. We're just, there are stories because all paths lead to there. But I just want to figure out in my head, like, what happens to all of these countries with really high debt to GDP if they cannot service it and they're a lot at the same time?
German pensioners
Yeah,
take a hike.
so what ends up happening is for the EU to stay together, Germany has to continue to fund all of those countries, and they won't. Because why they won't is there's going to be a populist leader saying we're going to cut off the periphery. And that's going to turn into, and you'll see more and more populist leaders get elected because people will get so frustrated by not being able to pay their bills and the heating. They'll get cold and they'll get hungry, and they'll overturn governments. And those governments will blame somebody else, and it's not your fault, it's theirs fault, and it'll make the problem worse. That is unfortunately the situation we are in the path. And when I say expect the unexpected, expect when people are in that spot, they turn inward. And just think about what you do. Think about, well, I need to protect my family. You don't think about the person in Africa that your system is causing pain to. You think about myself. Most of your thoughts all day long is, how did I show up? What did I think? You don't even think about your family. And then you think about your family. And then you think about your friends and your neighbors and everything else, and maybe your country, or if your country is Bitcoiners, other Bitcoiners. So our self-interest is what drives us. And when you take away things, we turn more self-interested. And it's just a natural human condition that our politicians, when it turns like this, turn that populism against us to be able to drive control. So unfortunately, that's coming everywhere because there's no fix from the existing system. And so the faster we can move people to Bitcoin, the more they're going to be protected from that. When you called and said, would you come here? That's the reason I came here. The faster that, so when you have people like you that are talking to audiences about that, and you can infect other people to be able to do work, to be able to understand the importance of that work, so they can talk to other people about it and why that's so important. Because it avoids the worst of what the existing system is going to bring on. And the existing system has no way out. It has to get worse.
Last word to him.
Okay.
All right.
Because we want to take questions after that. So, do you want to add anything or?
No.
No? Okay, good.
That's a good last word.
Let's ask 2 questions from the audience. So if someone wants to ask something, Jeff or Greg or Srebrin or David, right there I see the first hand, and right here I saw the second one.
Yep. So my question is about the USA. So their debt is so high, I mean, in terms of the GDP. And so they have to increase the interest rates in order to save the economy. But in this manner, they're going to collapse the European Union. So my question is, how do they, so who is going to save them from the bankrupt in the end if they don't do this? So if they're going to print the money till forever, or how does this going to happen? I mean,
Jeff mentioned that they're energy self-sufficient and food self-sufficient, so they could kind of save themselves when they print too much money or even increase the interest rate at the expense of the rest of the world. But I believe this is the last short squeeze they can do on the world. After this, because the wrecking ball, it's destroying economies, there could be another Plaza Accord or an agreement to try to get away from this behavior. Because again, they look only in their own interests, which is natural, but way more people will probably suffer consequences of their, policy of too fast rising interest rates.
And the U.S.
Europe cannot afford these levels for sure.
The U.S. will too. Just the same reason that they didn't predict the inflation. First, there's going to be no inflation. Then inflation is going to be transitory, and then we have high inflation. Why people don't see that is because that distortion of money, it comes out on a lag. It comes on quite a lag. So the tightening policy right now in the U.S., the U.S. dollar is going to go up. That makes imports more cheaper, but it makes exports, so all of those businesses are going to fail. The zombie companies are going to fail. And as they fail, all of those that unemployment, which is a lagging indicator, is going to explode. And the debt to GDP, because the economy goes down, explodes. And as all of that employment hits, all those people, they're going to turn to the state for services, unemployment insurance, medical, whatever, to be able to not be on the street. It explodes more. So at some point, they have to invert and go the other way in a big deal. And why they have to is because every central bank that goes through this always loses independence. There is no central bank with independence over a long time because the people demand that the government take over and elect somebody else to take it over, and you have helicopter money.
Like Turkey.
Yeah, like Turkey. Yeah.
But also, a reason why they say transitionary inflation, my belief, they probably didn't expect that China will play the COVID game for, they say, 5 years, zero COVID policy. But the hidden thing here, from what I've gathered, is that they try to kind of destroy supply chains, which is a problem for the Western world, which depends on their production capacity. So if the Americans print the money and hope that things are back to normal, we just inflate it away, it goes around the world. But then China comes along and says, oh, well, we've got zero COVID policy, we test everybody every few days. Business is not back to normal. Then you've got Russia not playing ball with the energy and all these other issues. So their hand is forced because things didn't work out as they expected also. Yeah. They were hoping they were going to export the inflation away. But now actually inflation is sticky because what they print stays inside their borders. The supply chains are not working as before. Globalization is going down. This is so very negative for, whoever prints has to eat it now.
Okay, and we had a second question that we have to ask right there. And after that, we're taking a break for 30 minutes.
You can take one more if you want.
Hi.
Okay.
My question is about Bitcoin is going to completely revolutionize the financial industry. But outside of that, which industry will, in your opinion, each one of you, will have the biggest positive impact as an industry?
Yeah, all industries, starting with energy. So energy and Bitcoin is synonymous. Energy companies will be Bitcoin miners. It's a pricing mechanism for more energy and a natural free market pricing for energy independence. And so if you're an energy company and you don't Bitcoin mine, that means energy companies that Bitcoin mine are more profitable than you and will eat you. And so that would be the first one, but you're going to see, and then as that wave, remember, energy is in everything. As that wave transitions across society, and people think energy prices, technology is everywhere else, but energy prices should go up forever. Like, it's insane. We have tons more energy. We have tons more energy sources. We have technology in energy, fracking, so better distribution, more robotics, better exploration. The world stranded energy coming online, yet prices go up, and because they're measuring from a system that's manipulation of energy prices going up.
Last question from
Sorry. You.
there.
If I can add also, I think the most important asset is petrol. Because if you quit the dollar from petrol, you take out the instrument of monopoly.
We'll probably develop way more energy resources, but petrol. Petrol was designed to benefit the reserve currency of the day. Because it's back then, there were not a limited amount of places where you could extract it.
That's right.
I mean, just even a century ago, we already had technology to make electric cars, but they killed it because it's not as easily controlled. The rulers of the day always choose the technology which can be controlled by less amount of players who can be corrupted one way or another, to back up whatever.
Although electric cars are, they're very dependent on lithium, which is also, that means that the bigger...
It's a lot.
Yeah, the bigger export of lithium, that... All right, so yeah.
I have a quick question. It's related to the deflationary nature of Bitcoin. For example, if Bitcoin became a global currency, how that deflationary nature, what will be the effect? Like, for example, currently, if you have fiat currency, you need to make some business to keep your wealth?
That's in the fiat world.
We're gonna explore that a lot with Natalie, but and so let's park that and we'll I'll deal with it.
It will be
in
explained
the,
in the next.
in the
Cool.
next one after the break.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.